What is hands down one of the most annoying things that people do? It's not interrupting, it's not chewing with their mouth open, it's giving unsolicited advice. And as we'll talk about in today's Spiritual Perspective episode, giving unsolicited advice is probably one of the biggest signs of having low self-awareness. Now, what do we mean by unsolicited advice? That's when you give somebody advice that they did not ask for. And parents of grown children are classic for this, especially moms. They're always giving unsolicited advice. Be careful about this. Watch out for that. I'm sure you've also noticed this in some of your friendships. The friends who tend to give other friends the most unsolicited advice are the friends who are also parents. Why? Because parents have been conditioned to always warn their kids about what to do and what not to do, and that carries over into friendships as well. The problem is when you give that kind of advice to your adult friend, it usually comes off as basic or obvious or even occasionally insulting because you're talking to them as if they're your child. And that's the irony. You probably mean well and you're genuinely trying to help, but 9 times out of 10, your unsolicited advice is only going to fall flat. And because you're so invested in giving advice, it takes a lot of self-awareness to not give advice, or at the very least to follow the proper steps for giving feedback, which I actually talked about in this episode on how to give people feedback from the spiritual perspective. So the question becomes, is there a way to get your friends or whoever you're talking to actually welcome your advice, or at the very least to give them your unsolicited advice without triggering them, without insulting them, without pushing them away? The short answer is yes. And once I show you what that way is, you're going to start to recognize it when other people do it to you, and you're going to appreciate it so much more. Now, let's zoom out for a second. Why do we even feel compelled to give advice in the first place? It's simple. We don't want to see our friends walk straight towards what looks to us like an obvious and avoidable mistake. And so we swoop in like helicopter friends, trying to prevent them from falling down and scraping their knees. But here's the thing. In life, nothing teaches us more thoroughly than falling down and scraping our knees. Think about your own life and the biggest lessons that you've learned over your life. Were they lessons that you learned because somebody sat you down and warned you about it? Or were they lessons you learned the hard way, and then afterward, those lessons were seared into your memory, never to be forgotten? My prediction is that 99% of the lessons you learn the hard way. And I'll also bet that someone warned you beforehand, but you ignored their warning, thinking that you were going to be the exception. How can I be so confident about this? Because it's the same thing that's happened to me, right? It's just human nature. We all think we're going to be the exception until life shows us otherwise. And here's the funny part. It is possible to be the exception, but in order to be the exception, you oftentimes have to take exceptional action. And most of the advice that people warn us about is usually not about taking exceptional action. It's about doing the comfortable thing or doing the safe thing in order to avoid the pain or the potential failure, which is why, in my experience, and maybe you've noticed this too, but the people who've actually taken exceptional action are often the least likely to give advice. Why? Because they know and appreciate how powerful lived experience is. Meanwhile, the people who've taken mediocre action after mediocre action are often the ones handing out advice like it's Halloween candy. And look, a lot of times it comes from a good place, right? They just want to feel useful. Or, like I mentioned, maybe it's because they raised kids who constantly needed warnings. But the other thing about unsolicited advice givers is they seem to be overly attached to whether or not the person that they're dumping their advice onto actually follows it. And if they don't follow it, the advice giver tends to get offended, right? And that's how you know that advice wasn't actually coming from a pure place. It was coming from your ego, which is another way of saying it was coming from your need to be right. But either way, it doesn't help. Now, let me be clear. I'm not talking about advice that somebody asked you for. If someone comes to you and sits you down and says, hey, you've been through this experience. What did you learn? What would you do differently? That's an entirely different conversation, right? That is solicited advice. What we're talking about is when someone's excited about doing something and they're telling you all about their plan or idea or something that they want to experience. And then you jump in and spoil the excitement with, well, don't forget to watch out for this situation or be careful of that scenario. And here's the truth. Your advice may actually have merit. It may be coming from real experience. But again, if they didn't ask for it, then they're not really going to hear it as deeply as you may think they should. They might nod politely. They might even smile, but most likely they're just going to ignore you, just like you've ignored unsolicited advice in your life. So then the question becomes, what do you do instead? Okay, here's the spiritual perspective on navigating this situation without coming from your ego. When an adult shares their plan with you, notice I said adult, I'm not talking about parents with children. When an adult friend shares their plan with you, the most powerful response that you can give them is to just be happy for them. Even if you can clearly see holes in their plan or in their logic, even if deep down you think that this plan is just doomed from the start, be happy for them anyway. And if you can't be happy for the outcome, then be happy to yourself for the lessons that they're going to learn that are going to serve them well in the rest of their life. Or be happy by the potential that they may step up and become the exception by taking exceptional action. Either way, be happy for them. And your happiness alone will do more to strengthen your relationship with that person than any advice that you could ever give them that they did not ask for. Now, if you absolutely cannot resist the urge to offer them advice, here's your move. First thing, you want to ask for permission. You can say something like, hey, Mark, I've been down this road before and I had some experiences that you might find useful. Would you like to hear them? And then stop talking. And here's the hard part. You have to be okay if Mark says no, right? If you get resentful when somebody declines your advice, again, that means that you weren't giving the advice for their benefit. You were giving it for the benefit of your ego. You needed to feel right. And that's not true friendship. So step one is to get their permission. Step two is if they give you their permission, you want to qualify your advice by first validating their experience. What do I mean by that? Before you give your advice, you say something like, I'm probably not telling you anything new, Mark, but in my experience, ... See the difference? You're not talking to Mark as if he's clueless and you're going to enlighten him with this thing that he's never considered about this plan that you just heard about. Instead, you're going to give Mark credit for thinking about these things before you add your perspective. And this type of validation is powerful because we all love feeling validated. We all love feeling smart. Nobody wants to be spoken to like they're stupid. And if you talk to Mark like he's probably already aware of what you're going to say, then it'll make him more open, more curious, and more willing to listen to what you have to say. Are you finding it hard to be present? You're always scrolling, you're not sleeping too well. Maybe you're overly relying on caffeine and other substances just to make it through the day. If this is you, the most natural way to stay rooted in the present moment is by dialing in your inner work. I know how it is to try to do your inner work and have your meditation and other practices feel clunky, and you keep making excuses not to do it. Now I help people like you take their inner work to another level. And it starts with a free 30-day inner work Kickstart. You'll get 30 prompts from me over 30 days showing you how to approach inner work in a more enjoyable way that will fit into the busiest schedule. You get a roadmap, you get accountability, and in the process, you become more present as well. And that presence is going to refund you back the time you did not think you had to start in the form of more clarity and a higher quality of rest. Just go to lightwatkins.com/innerwork to get started, or click the QR code on the screen. And then step 3 is you're not going to overload him with your advice. Okay. So don't stack 10 warnings and 10 don'ts on top of each other. Start with just one, see how he responds. If he says, that's interesting, tell me more, then you can share another one. But if in the process of you sharing that first bit of advice, their eyes glaze over or they change the subject, that's your cue to stop. They're not receptive. Maybe they've already thought about what you're saying, Or maybe they just don't care about your perspective and they were just being kind by saying, sure, tell me your thoughts. Or maybe their intentions are totally different than what you assumed they were. And maybe, just maybe, you're not the right person to advise them in the first place. That's another blind spot that a lot of us have when it comes to advice giving. We assume that maybe because we read a book or an article or saw something on television, that we're in this superior position to give someone advice, and that could be a very dangerous assumption. So instead, you can always ask, hey, tell me more about your plan, or what's your intention, or what outcome do you want from this experience? And you want your tone to be curious as opposed to interrogating. And once you get those answers, you'll be even more sure about whether or not you have something truly valuable to offer. Okay, so let's recap the 3-step method to giving unsolicited advice. Number 1, you want to always start with asking permission. Number 2, you want to validate them before you give your advice, as if they probably already considered whatever you're going to say. And number 3, you're going to start small and only go deeper if they invite you to go deeper. If you follow these 3 basic steps, you can give unsolicited advice without triggering people. But if you ignore these steps, you're going to cause lots of resentment, and you're probably going to end up fracturing relationships that you were only trying to strengthen. And here's the other thing. If you start to notice a pattern where multiple people in your life don't want to grow, or they aren't coachable, maybe that's not them. Maybe it's the way you've been trying to give them coaching. Because here's the spiritual perspective. From the ground level, everybody wants to be right, and they want to prove that they know better. But from the 30,000 foot view, the spiritual perspective, it's not about being right. As the saying goes, you can be happy or you can be right, but you can't be both. And what you ideally want to do is just be there for your friends to whatever degree that they want you to. And a lot of times they just want your support or your kind words. And that's enough. If they're hell-bent on trying something risky and you can tell by the conversation that they're probably just going to fail, then maybe they need to fail. I'll never forget going with a friend of mine to his grandmother's house many years ago, and his grandmother was sitting in this rocking chair, and it looked like she may fall out of the rocking chair. And my friend warned his grandmother. He said, "Grandma, be careful you don't tip over." And I'll never forget her response. She said, "Look, if I'm simple enough to fall out of this rocking chair, then you just need to let me fall out." And the same is true with our friends. If they're foolish enough to make certain mistakes in order to learn deeper life lessons, then sometimes we just need to let them fall out of the chair. I hope this perspective was useful. Let me know down in the comments what resonated with you the most, or let me know what you disagreed with. I read all the comments. I love hearing your takes. Also, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel and share it with somebody who could use this message. That helps to spread the word, and it also coincidentally helps with the algorithm. And if this landed for you, definitely check out this video on how to give feedback and this other video about navigating toxic relationships. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.